Welcome to Season 6 of Gyrl Sense. I'm Maria del Carmen, your host. Today's guest is Maryam Khan, who's running for State Representative for the 5th District, and that covers Windsor, South Windsor, and Hartford. So Maryam, welcome to the Gyrl Sense show. I am very honored to have you on in your current role or aspiring role as well, But I'm going to jump right in, and I want to just learn a little bit more about you. Like, where did you live before? Did you always live in Windsor? What brought you to Windsor? And you stuck in Windsor. You stayed. So what keeps you here?
Right. So my family and I moved to Windsor in the year 2000. We moved from New York City. My parents came to the United States in 1994. And we were in New York City for about 6 years. And in the year 2000, my dad wanted to just move out of the city. He visited somebody in Connecticut once and liked Connecticut, so looked for a place here and found a place in Windsor, and decided to bring his 4 children here. So I've been in Windsor since the year 2000. I did move after high school. After I graduated Windsor High School, we moved to Manchester for a little bit. And then I moved back with my own 3 children. And so now we live in Windsor with, I have my 3 kids. They go to Windsor Public Schools. But I've been in Connecticut most of my life. So from the year 2000 and on, I've been in Connecticut. I went to MCC for my first college experience. And then I went to Eastern and did my bachelor's degree there. And finally to Central to do my master's in special education. So I currently work as a special ed teacher. And my political role in about 2017, a little before that, I kind of started going to board meetings in town to kind of know more about the school system that my children were in, and just kind of playing an active role in that. Eventually, when there was an opening on the Board of Education, I was asked to run for Board of Ed, and I did. I'm glad I did. So Board of Education, they cover a lot. They cover curriculum, policy, lots of other long-term planning for the school districts, and we passed the annual budget. So being able to be in that seat as a parent, as a teacher, as a former Windsor High School student, meant a lot, and I was really able to advocate on behalf of families to the best of my ability. I feel like, Board of Eds often are not representative of the people that they serve. Mm-hmm. And so having parents, having teachers, having former students, all are very important because, we're making decisions for the school district, and a lot of those decisions impact our students directly. And we want to make sure that we're making them that, decisions that are in best interest of our students. So I'm glad to be able to have been able to do that. I did that for about 4.5 years. And then this past March, there was a special election for the state representative seat, for which I ran there. And it was just kind of to take that advocacy that I was doing here for Windsor to the next level and be able to advocate for all people and all kids in Connecticut.
And you touched upon several things. So one of the things is you moved to Windsor, and you were interested and wanting to know, and knew enough that you were able to attend those board meetings. And I think that is something that it's just always a work in progress. How do we get the voices out there, or the message out there, the awareness for these parents to know that these board meetings are really meant for them, so that they can sit and see, the decisions made within the school system that may affect their, own household, and that they have a voice as well at the table per se. So what do we have in place that, there's an outreach for parents to let them know that the meetings are there for them? Is there something embedded in the actual school system, but I don't know if that, rubs wrong because it's a political thing. But how are parents made aware that, if at all, that they too can attend the board meeting?
So all board meetings are public. They have to be public. And so if there's ever a board meeting in a room, doors are always open. Parents can come in. The agendas always have to be posted prior to the meeting, so that all parents can access it and they know what's going to be discussed. Anything that's not on the agenda can't just be brought up without prior notice to the community. And so parents can access those documents online. One of the other things we do in Windsor is we send out an email to parents, and it kind of has the agenda for the upcoming meeting, and it tells you where the meeting is being held. Since the pandemic, one of the things that's happened is we've gone to Zoom for a lot of the meetings, and though the board now is back in person, parents can still access the meeting on Zoom. So the email that comes through from Windsor has the agenda and the link to join the Zoom meeting. And then one of the great things about joining on Zoom is you can also call in during audience to visitors. So audience to visitors is a time that you can kind of speak to the board. You can't ask a question that requires a response, so they won't respond to you, but they will get back to you after. And so you can ask, or you can express a concern, you can express a question, but it really just allows parents an avenue through which that they can go through if they're not getting a response elsewhere. And so they can do that now online versus before, you had to come in person. And that's not always feasible, especially with kids or work schedules for people. So there is that option online now. So that's been wonderful, and we've seen increased engagement from parents for since we've had that online option, because
great.
You can just kind of call in and speak there. So for parents to just kind of at least listen in even is very important. That way you kind of know what's going on that week. Or that month. The superintendent goes over their report. They go over kind of what to look forward to next month, what's been happening previous months. If there's any concerns at any school, we talk about those. And then through the year, between like January and March, we're setting the budget for the next year. So let's say if a district were to be looking at budget cuts, you would want to make sure you're part of those meetings so you can advocate and say, well, don't cut this or don't cut that. In Windsor, we've been pretty good in passing budgets that are investing in our programs in our schools, while still keeping the budget feasible for our families. So, just being able to at least listen is very important for families, just so you know what's going on, and then if you have a concern or question, there's always opportunities to speak up and raise your voice there.
That's wonderful that they kept the hybrid model since the pandemic. There are some good things from the pandemic, and that is one of them. Still, though, some parents may be able to listen, which is great for them. In particular, parents who may have a language barrier or a cultural barrier, or intimidated. So this works well for them, that they don't have to physically physically attend, but and they can listen as best as they can and understand as best as they can. But now that they have the information, and now that it provoked questions, how do we get them to the next step as far as expressing their concern if they're intimidated because of a language barrier, of sort? Is there somewhere or some person that they can go to?
Yeah, so, depending on what the concern is, I know I'm a parent with, I have kids in three, like one in elementary, one in middle, one in high school. So for me, first, I go to the school principal. Yeah. If that problem is more of a district issue or something else, especially if it's on the budget, that's when you probably go to the superintendent, or you're not getting a response at the school level. But one of the good things that we do here in Windsor is Dr. Hill hosts coffee talks often, and they're at different times in the day each time. So sometimes they're during the daytime, sometimes they're in the evening. And you kind of have an opportunity to speak to him more one-on-one. Some of his staff is there as well on a specific concern. If if you feel like you need more of maybe a private setting, it's a very specific concern. You don't want to say it on on a live TV. You can definitely go there and speak. But there are multiple avenues. I start with the principal first because usually, like a classroom teacher, principal, depending on what level the concern is. But if it's a district concern and you need to reach the superintendent, there are ways that you can. And all those meetings they'll come to your email and they're posted online as well.
Okay. And assuming that if you have a child in the school system, then they have email.
Yes, you should be getting your emails from the district.
From the district. Okay, wonderful. So now take us through the journey of your, that opportunity that arose for you to run the last election. Really getting into it initially because you were just interested in learning about what's going on in Windsor and the school system because you have children that attend the school system. But now you saw something that you probably could really make an impact, and that would be, to run. So take us through that journey. What made you finally say yes, or was it a hard yes in the beginning, and the whole journey?
Okay, so I had served on the Board of Ed for about 4.5 years, and right before this special election was kind of called, I knew that there were a lot of issues that the state was having in terms of teacher shortages. And so when this position kind of came about, people had called me and asked me to run. My initial thought was, well, I don't know all that this might entail. I don't know if this would work with my schedule. But I knew that it was an avenue through which I can kind of work towards, being there when we're talking about these concerns, especially in terms of teacher shortage. And so I did my research on like what that would entail, running for a position like this, how I could still teach while being a state legislator. And so I talked to some teachers that are currently legislators that were able to give me some idea on what their schedules look like. Okay. So that was helpful. And so I finally decided, that, this is an avenue through which I can make a difference. And it's an avenue through which I can make a difference at a much larger scale than just Windsor, right? So I knew that, if I want to make a positive impact, especially not just in terms of education, but positive things for the community, this is a good avenue through which I can do that. And so that's kind of what made me decide that I really wanted to run for that position. I talked to a lot of people in my community that had asked me to run, and I talked to people that were already in office, and they kind of just, that coming together, that kind of helped me make that decision. And so being on now for at least half a session since March, I'm really happy that I did decide to do that. I think it's an avenue through which I can address a lot of things. I went in with knowing I wanted to, focus on education, access to healthcare, access to housing. But, getting there, I noticed there's so many other things that, the state focuses on, and so many ways that we can really make impact for the community that just need people to advocate, right? Like you need to just be able to say, my community really needs this, and then get those resources to your community. So I'm really glad to have been elected in March. That kind of gave me like an insight before this this will be my first full term if I'm reelected, so that I know kind of like, okay, there's a lot of work there, and there's a lot of potential there for good work. So I'm happy to be there and to continue that.
That's wonderful. So during that initial campaign, it's not always a smooth ride, as we always know, and thank goodness it's not always a smooth ride, right? But was there a time, a certain event, or did someone say something to you where you kind of just took a deep breath and say, okay, this is why I got into this. This is why I'm doing this. And it was meaningful for you, and you knew you were doing the right thing.
Yeah. So the race that the campaign we did was very short. It was like we had less than a month really to get a whole campaign together and tell people that there was a special election happening.
Yes.
And so we were out knocking doors, all the time. And one of the things that I noticed in that last week before election, that's the time when you're probably the most nervous because you're like, there's not enough time. We didn't do as much as maybe we wanted, or did we get to people? Are people going to remember? But one of the things I noticed in that last week, a lot of the doors I went to, people knew who I was. They either knew who I was because we had already been there once, so we were knocking them twice, which is good. They had gotten my mailers, they'd gotten phone calls, they'd seen it on TV, they'd heard of the campaign. A lot of people answered the door and said, Maryam, you're at my door, you're running for state rep, I know you are. So that kind of stuff was really meaningful because they knew like, I know you're a teacher and I know you've been on the Board of Ed, or I know you're the vice president of the Board of Ed, right? Yeah, like, so that kind of really helped me feel like, okay, well, people know who I am, people care, and people, want to see this. So it was really nice seeing that last week. Yeah. I had a lot of state representatives that came and door knocked that last week for me. And when they came, and they came back and they were like, Maryam, people love you.
Yeah.
Like, this is, you're good. And I was like, yeah, but, and, you're always nervous as a candidate. But I remember a lot of them were like, we all came out here and we're glad we're here, but everybody loves you. And I was like, well, that's good. So we really wanted to make sure we hit a lot of, made sure everybody was getting multiple contacts. They knew what was going on. They knew the special, because with the special, it's not election day, right? So it's not on your calendar. Right. It's just another Tuesday.
Right.
And it's just one person on the ballot. So you're only getting a call from that one person. So it's tough to make sure that people come out. But luckily we were able to do that well.
So that's really, really special because what that entails is, one of the things for any political candidate is gaining that trust. So it was very apparent that although what they knew of you for the most part were maybe hearing you with interviews or reading, about you, or knowing that you were currently vice president of the board, that to them and the work you had already done through those avenues, already was something that worked for them. Therefore, they trusted you in becoming a state representative. So you were far ahead of the game without knowing, and that's really, special and unique. So, speaks volumes for, political reputation-wise and of sort. For that person who doesn't know you. Right? Yeah. For that person who says, well, I don't know Maryam. So that's good background, a good story to really put out in the light. I mean, that's really your business card right there, right? As they say. So having said all of that, now you're coming in a little seasoned into your new campaign. So what are some tactics, strategies, or lessons that you are kind of coming in with from the old campaign? Now that this is going, it's a new campaign, but yet you're essentially continuing the work that you're already doing.
Right. So, one of the things that I learned last time is making sure that we meet people where they are at their homes, knocking their doors was really important. So we're doing the same thing this time, especially there's a lot of new voters to my district. There's new people. All of South Windsor voters are new to my district. We have some voters in Windsor that were previously in Bobby Gibson's district that are new to my district. And then some voters in Hartford that were previously in Josh Hall's district. So we have lots of new voters in the 5th District, and making sure that people know, this is your new district. A lot of people have new polling places, those kinds of things. Because a lot of people just don't even know that, right? That now I have to vote somewhere else, and, something that they've been doing for 10 years has changed. So making sure that people know, where to go, what to do. A lot of that is easy to do when you're at their door and just saying, especially if you've been changed into the district, and then where you're voting. So being able to do that has been great. The other thing is, last time when we were knocking doors, I wasn't a state representative, right? So I didn't have a lot of the connections to be able to connect them to services that they might need, especially if they needed services from a state agency. Now going in, it's helpful because I know, who to connect them with and what they might need. And being able to say, oh, have you tried this, or, have you reached out to so-and-so? That's been really good, being able to have that information for people in the community so that they can get what they need. Because when you go to people's homes, you meet a lot of people, and a lot of people that, I was meeting, I noticed had some distrust, possibly, in government in general. And it came from a valid place, because it came from, their needs were not being met by the government, and nobody was picking up their call, or nobody was getting back to them. And, and when your needs aren't met, you're not going to want to go out and vote for people that you feel aren't meeting your needs. And so being able to kind of help people get them what, they need, or get them connected to what they might need has been good. And then in general, I think one of the things that we've learned is the power of having these relationships with people in the community. So when I'm door knocking, I'm meeting people that, I'm asking for their vote, essentially. But one of the things I really like about meeting people is being able to make connections. So a lot of the doors that I went to this time that I remembered from last time, and when people opened the door, I was like, oh, I remember you go to this church, and remember we had that conversation? They were like, yeah, I remember. So that relationship is really important, because if that person then has a concern or issue with, that I can help them with, they know that they can reach out to me directly. And that's something that I really wanted to be able to do, is be available to people and be accessible. And I think, when you're knocking doors, the perfect time to do that, because you meet so many people, and being able to connect them with, put a face to the name, right? This is who I am. You know who I am. Some people get really excited when they see the candidate at the door, because they're like, you're knocking doors. Wow, that's awesome. And I'm like, yeah, because I want to meet you and I want to hear from you. So that's been really good. I think, I really value the relationships that I've built, and I want to continue to build that. People that haven't met me, if I can get to their doors or meet them elsewhere and be accessible to them, I really want to be able to do that. One of the things we did over the summer, also just to meet kind of just people where they were at, I noticed, since I have 3 towns in my district this time, a lot of the district has really good food options. And I'm a little bit of a foodie. So our campaign team came up with the idea of doing like a food tour, a district food tour. And so we held about 2 events in each town in the district at different local food spots to allow people to just come in, meet me, eat some food. We're supporting the local businesses, and it was just an easy way for me to be accessible. So in each of the towns, I was able to meet new people, that might not have come out for maybe something very political, but because this was just like, come and eat with me. I think it, some people that might have been nervous, where it was easier for them to come out. So that's something that I hope to continue. I think gathering around food is always a good idea.
Always a good idea.
And and that way, again, it's about being accessible for me. And so if, I can hear directly from the community what their concerns are and what their needs are, that's what helps me make decisions at the Capitol, right? Because I don't want to make a decision based on just what I believe about the community. I want the community to tell me what their needs are, and then I can assess that. Because so many, things can impact different communities differently. Something can impact one town in a very positive way and another town not so positive. And so I like to be able to rely on these relationships so that I can get feedback and say, hey, I know you spoke to me a lot about, education and you, are in this town and you're on your board or you're a teacher. How do you feel about this education bill that we're talking about? What are your thoughts on this? Because that's what I rely on to really make my decisions at the Capitol.
And that's good. So twofolds. I want to slightly go back just a tad because you mentioned, when you're in a school system, obviously you still are, and you mentioned that you got into the political world mainly because not just the school, but housing and other, I guess, acts or causes. How do they all do they connect for that student, between housing and anything else? Like what has been your experience?
So one of the things that when I started thinking outside of education, especially when I was considering this role, and I've always thought about as a teacher, is how everything else affects education. So a lot of times when people say, such and such school is failing, we need to give them more money. But a school having resources alone, if that's the only, change we're making in that community, cannot lead to success in the school. I think there's so many other factors that play into a child's education. So when I was teaching at an elementary school in Hartford years ago, one of the things I noticed is there were some students that had large gaps in their learning. But if you looked at what schools they'd been at, like in the last 4 years, they've been to 6 or 7 different schools, right? And so that creates huge gaps in learning because you might have been mid-year, you left, and this teacher taught this earlier and this teacher taught it later. So housing and how it affects education is like, it's like this, it really, really plays an active role. If you've lived in one town, like I lived in Windsor from grade 7 to 12, and I went to the same middle school and the same high school, it makes a big difference because then your school can plan better for you. They can make sure that they're meeting your needs. And so how can we say we want better schools without saying we want to make sure that housing is available and housing is accessible and safe and adequate for families? Because a lot of times the reason people are moving is because it's not safe or it's not adequate, right? And so how can we ensure that housing is in place? How can we ensure that access to healthcare is in place? Because if your healthcare needs aren't being met, you can't be educated to your best ability. If parents' healthcare needs aren't met, they can't help educate their child to the best of their ability. So making sure that we're kind of looking at the other pieces of the puzzle and looking at everything as a whole in terms of how can we help children be successful. I think that's often missing from the conversation. And that's something that, especially in my district, I want to be able to say, yeah, I want to advocate for education, but I want to advocate for housing. I want to advocate for healthcare. I want to advocate for needs that my community might have in terms of youth programs, right? Like, what are we doing to engage our kids after school? Because that is also education. So all those things kind of factor into how we raise our children and how we as a society want to function. So I want to be able to look at all that together and not just on its own, because I think they all work together. And if we raise all of those things together and we invest in all those things together, then we can actually say, okay, now we should be able to see an impact, a positive impact, versus people would say to us on the board, well, you increased this last year. Why isn't there an impact? Well, there's a lot of factors that play into this, and we haven't unfortunately been able to, influence it to that grand of a level because we can't influence housing and we can't influence this. So, board is just one piece. So we can do our work here, but we need everybody else to be able to do their pieces so that all of it works together in benefit for children.
Right, and then it's not just while they're in school to provide those resources. I know another important cause of yours is after graduation, so providing resources for them, for students at that level. at that period of time
Yep.
as well. Again, one of the things that you have already achieved that many politicians can only dream of achieving is building those relationships. So the earlier talk about people recognizing you at the door, or now when you're going back and knocking on the same door, or remembering a conversation, that is pretty authentic, genuine you. Right? And so this is what builds you. This is what creates your business card. And that's what also is the foundation of why people trust you, really, before getting to know who you are just by the interviews or reading about you or third-party information. So this is more of a comment in the sense that, good for you. First of all, I do believe you're coming in, and I think to validate those individuals that you mentioned before that wouldn't care to vote because their concerns were never met before. So why should they vote? But you going in and addressing those at that point in time when you're opening the door or creating a conversation, or providing the resource for them. So just that in and of itself, right? You already have that. That wheel is already going. So for individuals to already know that you're not in it for status, you're not in it for, just, the name, or to say that you are, state rep. You're really in it because you believe in the causes that you're running for, and people believe that with you as well. So they're, standing, beside you, and not looking at a distance, kind of like, well, what does she want? They know. So, as a voter myself, I've been on both ends, right? So I'm like, I'm going to vote, but I don't know anything about this person, but I'm going to vote because I want to vote. You know what I mean? I've been there.
Yeah.
But the one thing I don't do is not vote.
Yep.
Right? So, I've exercised my voting rights, but it feels it's a different level, and it's a different way of meaning as a voter to vote for someone you actually have had conversations with. And know, if you have not had conversations with, to know that they're not intimidated by you. That to know that, oh, I can call Maryam for that. Oh, she'll know. You're just really the next door neighbor.
Yeah.
Trying to help out rather than, for lack of a better term, a three-piece suit walking around. Just for the handshakes, right? Because there's the handshakes.
Yeah.
And then there's people who really want to make change. So I commend you for that. And I know that many of the voters that have already voted for you believe that wholeheartely as well. And I'm sure that since your first run and all of your successes that you've had, that, your new district individuals that are now in your, access to you, already may know all of that, and may have decided already just based on that. I want to touch upon, so if I move into Windsor or any of those other districts, or actually anywheres, right? If I'm just like, I think I may want to learn a little bit more, how do I run?
Yep.
Whatever journey that they're looking for, how are ways that individuals can learn about running, or if they really, really are interested, like how do one even build a campaign? And we're currently at your headquarters.
Yep.
How does one get a headquarter?
Yep.
And a team?
Yep.
So how does that work?
So, one of the things that I know I've had is slowly, as I got more and more involved in town, because before the Board of Education and before even the Board of Ed meetings, I would go to events in town, right? I went to a police forum that we had to kind of engage the police on an issue the community was having. I went to a couple town council meetings that were discussing something that was very important to the community at the time. So through these avenues, I got to meet some people and spoke to them about like, oh, okay, you know, I would love to be more involved, and kind of got introduced to other people through those ways. So that for me was my starting point into kind of finding out where do I need to go to be able to even want to make a difference, right? And at that time, I had never considered running for office. Like, even especially if you go back to high school, and you saw me in high school, I was not ever someone that wanted to run for office. I've always just wanted to be a teacher.
Okay.
But I know that I've always had this like innate like thing for justice,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And just wanting to make sure that things are always in place to the best of our ability,
Yeah.
that make sure that all people have, you know, a way to succeed in life. And so if I found avenues to which I can do that, I did that. And so eventually I figured out, okay, politics is a way that I can try to implement that for my community. So that's why I decided to go into politics. But, you know, even if, let's say, because I meet a lot of people that they want to be involved, but maybe they don't want to run right away, especially,
Right.
which is kind of how I started. So just being in the room sometimes, even if you don't speak, is so important, because these rooms where these decisions are made, there's not a lot of people in the audience. So when you come, you're noticed. And so, like, the first time that I came, I just sat kind of in the back and I didn't talk. And afterwards, several people approached me and said, hey, we noticed you stayed the whole meeting. You know, what's your name? Oh, we're so-and-so. I'm so-and-so. I'm so-and-so. And that kind of encourages you to try to get more involved as you meet more people. But just being in the room starting off is so, so important in your town council, city council, board of ed, whichever town you live in. They're always an open meeting. So anybody can come. You can sit in the corner of the room. You don't have to talk to people. But that way, you being in the room has a really it's a big presence, and it's a very good way to be noticed and meet the people that want to engage with you.
Yes.
Several times when we had board meetings, there was only one parent in the audience. You know, if that parent came up to us and talked to us, they got 9 board members for that one parent, you know, on on anything. So that's really, really powerful to have.
Very powerful.
So these rooms where a lot of these meetings happen and decisions happen, they're empty often, unfortunately. But so the people that come, you know, they're very much heard. So I would start there, definitely. And then once you get started, you know, especially at the local level, there's a lot of support in most towns for people who run to kind of help you start a campaign and how to campaign. I know most towns, I know like in Windsor, we run as a slate here. So what that means is you're not running your own campaign. Everybody, all the, you know, my party was the Democratic Party. All the Democrats are running together.
Yes.
And so we all campaign together. We all get signs. Someone's getting our signs. So a lot of that stuff is done there. And then once you go up and you do decide to go up to a higher level, there are campaign consultants that you can get to kind of consult on your campaign that can tell you where to get the best signs, where to get, you know, other resources that you might need for the campaign. But another thing I did is I participated in Emerge, which is a training. It's a national organization that trains Democratic women to run for office.
Okay.
And we have an Emerge chapter in Connecticut, so I did that. They go over a lot of this with you. Of course, it's only geared towards Democratic women that want to run for office, but it was very beneficial to me. They kind of teach you how to fundraise, you know, how to get access to a lot of these things that you might not know about before you run for office. So I did do that. And likewise, there are other training organizations out there that offer some of those trainings so that people can know how to do it. Yes. But to do a campaign really is, you know, you need to raise funds. So I raise funds from the community. I don't put forth any of my own money, so it's not, you know, unfair to someone that if I had a lot of money, then, you know, now I have $1 million and I just put together all my money. The money is raised by small donations in the community. And there are state grants that the state gives. And if you do decide to go to that route, there's a lot of legal guidelines that you have to follow. You can't spend money on certain, unnecessary expenditures.
Sure.
You can only spend it on things that you might need. You can't get too many donations from a specific, like a person. So one person can't give more than a certain amount. So they're all small donations. So that kind of holds you to a better thing anyway. But so I did all that. That's how I raised my money. That's how I was able to get what I need. And then finding a space in town that was accessible to all three. That's always a challenge,
Yes.
Especially if you have a multi-district district, but a multi-town district. And so for me, that was challenging, but this is kind of located centrally to all three towns. So it is, we were lucky enough to find this space. But yeah, I mean, it's the biggest thing I think is finding people that have similar visions.
Yes.
And then teaming with them to create that, because when this seat was vacated in January, people that knew me in the community were the ones that called me.
Yeah.
Some of those people that have moved out of Windsor were calling me and saying, Maryam, you really need to think about this.
Yes.
And this is why this might be good for you. And I wouldn't have known that. So, making sure that you have relationships with people in your community that have or share the same vision you do and what you want to see in your community, so that they can kind of help you there, because you can't do anything by yourself.
Right.
It's really hard, or you can, but it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And I like to be able to do things with people that are, that I know have the same vision and similar vision. So even like when we're door knocking, we have a lot of people from my district and my community that come and door knock, that know me, that know my vision, that believe in a lot of the same vision. So when they knock doors, they're as passionate as I am, and that's meaningful, rather than, maybe they might not know a lot about me or something like that. So I, because of those relationships, I've been able to have people come out and do those things. So definitely build relationships with people in your community is a big advice I would give to anyone that wants to ever be involved. Start making those relationships, start being in those rooms where these meetings are happening, these decisions are made. Introduce yourself, ask questions, people love to engage anyone that asks questions, even if it sounds like maybe not a great question. There's no such thing as that, but you might think, well, that's not a good question, I shouldn't ask that anyway, because as a person that when we were on the board, that's wonderful to be able to say, oh, okay, yeah, I can help you. Let me, that's why you serve. So that's
and you may obviously may not be the only one with the same question.
Right,
So,
exactly. Yep. Lots of people are often just too shy to ask.
Right.
So definitely ask questions and get your voice heard in those spaces.
Great. And then last, I want to touch upon taking the temperature in people's energies. Particularly our youths and our BIPOC community. And I say that because, since the 2 elections ago, and certainly after the George Floyd and that whole era, which seems 20 years ago, but it was just the other day, those events is what really spoke to people because those occur, which was a sad thing that had to happen for people to understand the value in voting.
Yep.
But we don't want any more events.
Right.
So how do we keep that same energy that people stood in line, whether it was raining or, whatever weather it was, whether it was too cold, too hot, how do we know, what is your sense as far as the interest with the youth and the younger community as for them to still come out and vote just as much as they marched for all, for the causes, they went to the polls with the causes. So what's your sense of temperature in that?
So, unfortunately, it is true that, a lot has had to happen for us to kind of say we can't sit back, right? Even just this year with the overturning of the Roe.
Right.
the past year with the insurrection that we had in D.C., people have seen that if we're not being active, we might not know what could happen, right, in our communities. So what can we do now to kind of really put our, get serious and kind of wake up and say we're not just going to be bystanders. So I think, I've noticed definitely a lot more young people being involved than probably previously. I know when, for example, when I was in high school, I didn't know a lot about local politics, but having a daughter who's a sophomore, and just being in a high school, lots of kids now are aware of, what's going on around them. A lot of it is due to social media, which, again, there's positives and negatives to everything.
Absolutely.
One of the positives is they see things when they happen, right?
Yes.
So when these things were happening, they were hearing about it as well, online. And so they're just as aware almost as we are about all the daily things that happen in the world. And that's a good thing, because being engaged and knowing is a lot better than, kind of living in your ignorance that, well, nothing bad is happening in my community, so the world must be perfect around me, right? Or my parents are safe and I'm safe, so everybody must be safe. But now knowing, there is a lot of evil that might be out there that could, potentially negatively impact my community. What can I do, and what can my parents do, and what can my community do to kind of make sure that we're doing everything we can to put out, good people in office? Because we have a lot of good people, and we have people that want good things for their community, but often they're the ones that may not be able to vote sometimes. Not that they can't, sometimes they're not able to vote, right? So actually one of the signs that's here, we have Vote Yes sign, so I'm going to take this time to kind of briefly go into that.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
This year on the ballot, there's going to be a question that asks, should the state amend our Constitution to allow for early voting? So right now, Connecticut is one of the 4 states that does not allow early voting. So other than these 4 states, every state in the United States allows for early voting. Even some of the states in the South that are very strict on a lot of their other voting laws allow for early voting. And what that really looks like, so I have family in the South, and often they'll tell me like, oh yeah, I already voted. And I'm like, what do you mean you voted? It wasn't election day. How does that work? So, in the couple weeks before the election, you can go into any of the polling places in a lot of these states and cast your vote. And having that capability to be able to do that and not relying on that one day,
of course,
would open the doors to so many more people to make sure that their voice is heard. Because when my kids are older, but when they were little, I remember we had to time it, that I can go at this time and you can go at this time. Or my mom doesn't drive, so there was always, well, who's going to take her? Whose work schedule works best on this Tuesday, versus if you have the other days, then there's always a day that you can just go in and kind of make sure your vote is cast. So that's a question that'll be on the ballot. So of course, I'm asking people to vote yes.
Yes for that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And it will help at the lines.
Yeah.
Right? There won't be any lines.
There won't be that many lines.
People won't be standing out in the rain.
Because it's not just election day. Yeah. That's why, like, when my family would say, why do you guys go on election day? Isn't the lines probably longer? And I was like, we wait 3 hours on the presidentials, and they don't even know what that's like, because they're just voting a couple weeks or a week or so in advance, or 2 weeks in advance. And so being able to do that this year would be great if we can get that passed, so then we can say, how can more people get their voice heard? Because this is only going to help us make sure that all voices are heard.
Right.
Because right now we know that some people, because of work schedules, because of childcare, don't get to vote. Right. Or sometimes just things happen that one day and you're just not able to make it to the polls. Right. So being able to make that more accessible is definitely something that we want to be able to do, especially when we talk about young people being involved in the process. As soon as you turn 18, you can vote. But if you have school during the day and you work at night, when are you going to vote? Right. So if we want to make sure that all these voices are heard, young people can vote, and elderly can vote, then we want to make sure that we have, time to vote. So we're really hoping that this time this measure can pass so that we can instill that for Connecticut. But I think, out there, I definitely see an increase from before, but I think there's definitely more work to be done, especially engaging kids that are in high school so that when they graduate at 18, they know that they can vote. I know when I turned 18, anybody in my household, my parents were like, you're registering to vote right away, and if there was any election, local, whatever, go vote. Yeah. We don't know who's on the ballot, go vote anyway, because my parents really, really made sure that we knew that. But I know a lot of my friends would be like, oh, how do you register, or how do you vote? Right. And so making sure that, we have that, have people registering and doing all this is really important. But I think I've seen definitely this increase. I know a few years back I did voter registration drives at my mosque, and we were registering people that said, I've been in this country 30 years and I've never voted. Yes. Yes. And now I can, I'm finally just deciding, and only because it was accessible, because it was in the mosque, yes. Right? So some of the things that, I want to be able to see also is like this automatic voter registration. That why do you have to register? Why can't, once you turn 18, you automatically be registered? Yes. Why does there have to be a whole process? Right. When all you really need is your ID and your information, which the state should have if you're, if you already have your ID by then. And so being able to say, let's take out these other barriers that we've put in place to voting, and make sure that people can vote as needed. So I think there's those conversations. You definitely see more young people active in local politics now, which is great, because local politics are what affects our daily lives the most. And so that's been great. I think we're going to see more of that. But, sometimes people, especially if you see, the president right now is great, so things must be great everywhere. But we can't rely on that. So we want to make sure that we're instilling that across the board. On your Board of Ed is very important. Yes. You want to make sure that your town council or your city council. So just making sure that every election day you're aware of what's happening, you're aware of the candidates. Most candidates will always have meet and greet options. And, going out and meeting people and asking your questions. So, okay, I know I'm voting for the right person because they answered this question that I had that I didn't know because maybe I couldn't find online. So doing that is going to be very important.
So full disclosure, I definitely have volunteered on your campaign, the first time around, and I plan to still for the second time around. I'm taking one of those signs with me home today. But to your point just now, when I did volunteer the first time, I remember, knocking on doors and, putting the tags on. And when someone with a Hispanic background would open the door, and I could tell that they really couldn't speak the language. And then because I am Hispanic, I was able to have a conversation and say who you were and so forth. And so I was able to have that connect them to what was happening. And so they too said the same thing. Oh my gosh, I've been here for so long. I've lived in Windsor for so long, or been in this country for so long. I haven't voted because I don't know how. And it was that language barrier. And I don't know where to go, or how to get there because I don't have a car. Yep. So I do remember that there was shuttles that were available for individuals at a certain point in the campaigns that I volunteered, if not for yours, for previous ones. And so how do you know if those services still are being offered for the particular population? And I think mainly we served the Wilson area with those shuttles. I actually drove about 6 people myself, because I also think that some of us just volunteered to drive them to their voting poll. So I actually did, individuals who either didn't drive or, physically couldn't move as easy. So do you know if those services are still available, and
So-
how do they find out?
Yep. So usually when a political campaign especially contacts you, they'll ask that follow-up that, do you need a ride to the polls? And we'll have volunteers on election day, just going back and forth, picking up people. Even that, the importance of that is so, needed, especially like when I look at my district and if I see like an area that's maybe mostly seniors, right? We have some housing in my district that's mostly seniors, and they're where they vote is very far.
Yes.
So being able to say, what can the city do to offer a shuttle or something? Yes. So those are things that individual campaigns can kind of do. Some towns may have that on their own, but I think, being able to advocate and say to the town, hey, we need this in this part of the town, because there's a lot of people that might not have a ride, especially when we've changed, because this year after the census, we've changed a lot of polling places. So some people that might have before voted right across the street are now going, somewhere else. Yeah. So making sure that, people have that access. But anyone can ask, campaigns for rides. They don't, obviously have a thing that you have to vote for me if I pick you. There's obviously none of that. So you don't feel like,
So do they call the town, or what would be a good?
I would try to contact. So one way to do it is to contact a campaign, right? Okay. So let's say if it's my district, and we've come to your door, we call you or anything. Usually we would ask you that follow up, but you can definitely ask that as well. Okay. That, hey, what do I do for a ride to the polls?
Yes.
Okay. I think there is a way you can reach out to your town and they can see if they can provide that as well. But I think that's town by town. But I know for my district, I like to be able to look at it and say, if there's a pocket here that I know will need a lot of rides, let's see if the city can do something, right? Or the town can do something, because there's a lot of people, and if we send a couple volunteers, that might not be enough, especially if somebody wants to go at the same, everybody wants to go at the same time. So being able to just make sure that is, accessible for people to go.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so what are upcoming events that we can attend, or if you're still in need of volunteers, what can anyone out there that either still wishes to, would want to help with your campaign, or attend like one of your foodies?
Yep. So until Election Day, we have no more foodie events, but if you do volunteer, we will feed you. So the next 2 weekends, we have 2 weekends till Election Day left.
Yes.
And so both weekends, we'll be campaigning. We'll be going door to door, making phone calls, writing postcards. So there's lots to do if anybody wants to volunteer. We also have job opportunities, especially for young people that want to look for some experience. So if they want to get some experience on political campaigns, we have some of those. People can go on our site. My website is just Khan, my last name, Khan for Khan, CONN.com. So people can go there, put in your information, and we'll reach out to you. But there's lots you can be doing. And if you're not in my district, there's always other campaigns around you that could probably use volunteers. So if people did want to volunteer still for something and be active before Election Day, because yes, it's important for us to vote, but how can we also help get out the vote, right? To make sure that everybody knows it's Election Day. Because though it is on our calendars as Election Day, it's not off. We know it's not a holiday, right? So people work, so it might just seem like any other Tuesday. Plus, the way Election Day works, like this week it's on the 8th, which is technically the second Tuesday because it's not on the first. But often it's been on the first Tuesday. So even knowing that, right, people might say, did I miss it? It was on the first. Now I didn't vote on the 8th, So making sure that education piece is done. I've been talking to a lot of people about the question that'll be on the ballot, so that people, when they see it, they're not like, what does this mean? That's what that means. It's early voting questions. So there's lots to do in other campaigns, but definitely if people want to volunteer for mine, we have lots of opportunities, and they can just reach out to us on our site or through social media pages, and we will get them something.
Great. Well, Maryam, it's been a pleasure. always having you in the space, and what a privilege it is to have you in my Gyrl Sense space now. So hopefully we did get some of the word out, and you get some calls and some emails in return.
Okay.
So I thank you for your service that you've already given to the state, not just as district, but just like really in reality the state as a whole. And you've earned it really well. So congratulations. I'll say that already.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Maria del Carmen, your host. Join us again for more Gyrl Sense.